This is something somebody was asking clarification of something you, I think, mentioned in the last session, but something about how Muslims believe they will be judged by Jesus. Did you say something to that effect?
So Jesus in Islam is a prophet of even higher standing than Muhammad. They don't believe that he died on the cross and rose from the dead. But many of the other elements of Christianity are affirmed in the Quran, including that he will judge the living from the dead. But they don't see it as, they believe God is one, and it's a blasphemy to suggest that there's a triune God. So they would not say that he's judging the world as God. Although our scripture says the only capable judge of the world is God. But they would say, because he's a prophet of even greater standing than Muhammad, he will act as God's proxy in judging the world. So that's their view, but they still reject the deity of Christ.
A couple of questions that are related to, like, if you're trying to do, how can we use apologetics to help other faiths, and particularly talking about people, Muslims or people in Jewish faith, and I guess in light of all the conflict between those groups in the world, does the apologetics play a role? Is there a voice? Is there an approach?
Yeah, a lot of it there is, but it's going to be based on your personal relationships. So I think we sometimes think, well, if I can master the case for Christianity in relationship to Islam, well, now I can reach my Muslim friend. Maybe. But more likely, you've got a relationship with your Muslim friend that hinges on other things. And loving him well, loving her well, and then answering the questions that come up. It could be very specific. So you could study Mormonism forever and then wonder why it is you can't reach your Mormon cousin. Well, because there's a lot of other dynamics, and you need to know your Mormon cousin really well. Because it may just be there's only one issue that would reach that person, and you haven't figured out what it is yet. So do I think that, no, yes, I do think what we know as Christian case makers can help us to reach our non-Christian friends, right? Here's what I would say. I think we misunderstand what it is to love. How can I? So look, Scripture says God, so imagine this is God, my glasses, is love. I could put an equal sign here. It says God is love. It also says in Scripture, though, that God is the fullness of justice and mercy, or truth and grace. So it says God equals love. It also says that God equals the perfect fullness. You see this in the Old Testament and in the New. John says in John chapter 1 that Jesus arrives in the fullness of truth and grace. That's not like he's saying, oh, Jesus is a cool guy. No, that's a claim of deity. Only one being holds truth and grace in its fullness. We don't. We're either leaning too much on truth or too much on grace. All of Scripture is trying to help us to figure out, how do I balance those two? But there's one being, God, who is the fullness of truth and grace. And John says that Jesus arrives in the fullness of truth and grace. He's claiming Jesus is God in chapter 1. But if this is equal to this, and this is equal to this, I can take this out. So now, if you're wondering what love is the fullness of truth and grace. Here's what we don't do. So we have friends in our world where we say, okay, well, these people are same-sex union. You know, I want to reach them. I want to love them well. Well, what is love? If I define love the way the world defines it, if you made a list, here's what I always see. Oh, it's affection, inclusion, it's acceptance, it's kindness, it's caring for, it's forgiveness, it's patience. Those are attributes of love. So I'll see my friends will say, well, yeah, I'm just trying to be patient with them and love them. I don't want to say anything that would hurt my chances of sharing something with them. Is that what love is? No, love is the fullness of grace and truth. You're just focusing on grace. So you can be if you got people who are sinning in your life or don't believe Christianity is true, and you're just inviting them over for dinner, I'm a good neighbor, I want to preach the gospel with my life, I don't want to be offensive in some way. Well, you're focused on the grace side of the equation. You haven't shared any of the truth side yet. Love is not just grace. Love is grace in truth in equal full measure. So I would ask you this, every time you do an act of kindness to someone who's not a believer because you're trying to win them, make a list. I did these acts of kindness. Tell me where you shared the truth. Oh, never did that. Just love. You're not going to love them into the kingdom. That's only half of the equation. We got to share truth. So I think part of it is us being bold enough to realize that that's the equation for love. So if you've got somebody you know is involved in a sinful lifestyle, love them. Invite them to dinner. But you got to share the truth with them. You don't love somebody you don't tell. They're standing on the train tracks. The train is coming and you won't tell them. That's not love. So it's this total balance of, so I just say whatever you do with your friends who are not believers, just remember at some point it's going to involve acts of mercy and words of truth. It has to involve both of those things.
I'll answer the first part. If you had to define apologetics in one word, it'd be apologetics. I'll give you the harder one in one sentence.
Okay, in one sentence. It's just case making. I never say I'm a Christian apologist. I say I'm a Christian case maker. I think there's that word in the Greek either is translated, depending on where you are in Scripture, in a couple different ways. It's really meant to make a defense. And Paul does this in the book of Acts, right? He makes a defense. But here's the problem with it. We've co-opted language, and everyone does that. So if I say that I'm doing apologetics, because the word often is used to express an apology, because that's a confusion, I'm not going to enter that confusion. Why would I enter that confusion? Have to now spend another sentence trying to deconstruct what apologetics is. I also don't think that people want you to be defensive. So I don't want to be seen as apologizing or defensive. So I just say I make a case. I'm a case maker. I'm a Christian case maker. That's 3 words, but it seems like everyone gets that. Or they might say, you can make a case for Christianity? Yeah. Then you got a conversation. But so I usually use the word Christian case maker.
Okay. Hopefully that clarifies. This is, I guess, kind of a practical question, but a good one. Where do you suggest, besides, of course, reading your books and watching your videos and going to your website, where else should someone go if they want to start becoming better at making the case that you're talking about for Christ?
Yeah, I think you should exhaust all free resources before you buy anyone's book, including mine. So most of us, we create free. We started off as youth pastors. We had a high school and junior high group for about 6 years, while our kids were that age. So we stayed with them, and I started writing on a blog every week. Whatever message I would give my students, I would simply put on the blog. That was made available to everyone for nothing. So we continue to do that. So we do a video on Mondays, the podcast is on Wednesdays, and an article posts on Friday. Those are all just made available. This is free content. A lot of good ministries are doing that. As a matter of fact, if you're just starting and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I make this overarching case? I would just say that in every aspect of your life where you've already got discretionary time that you're spending somewhere else, shift it toward the Christian worldview. So, for example, if you're a podcast listener, I am, and you listen to podcasts while you run or while you work, are you listening to Christian podcasts? There are a lot of good apologetics podcasts out there, and I mean it depends on what your thing is. If you like science, there's lots of good. James Tour has got a great podcast as a nanochemist, but he's a Christian. There's reasons to believe with Hugh Ross and all that group. There's lots of science-based apologetics podcasts. Start to exchange out the stuff you're listening for something that's. I love to listen to pastors that are preaching apologetics. One of them is Tim Keller. By the way, there's no one in this entire group I'm listening to you that I agree with completely. Like, you're not going to find someone you're going to agree with. I don't even agree with myself half the time. So I'm open to the idea that there are some non-essentials that we may not agree on. But I think Tim Keller is an excellent podcast to listen to if you listen to sermons. He's going to take an apologetics approach in every sermon. So there are some great places to go, but I would just look at the free stuff first. And we've got over 1,000 pieces of free content on our website, but we're not alone. Stand to Reason, str.org. Great place to go for resources. It's about a 30-year ministry. 30 years providing free content online. There's a lot to read there. I was part of Stand to Reason for about 14 months. It was a really good experience. Crossexamined.org. Crossexamined with a D. Crossexamined.org. That's Frank Turek's website. Lots of free content there. And just exhaust the free stuff first. I mean, that's what I would say. Because most of the stuff I've written about in my books, I have touched on briefly in articles over the years anyway. And it may just be that today you only have time for an article, or you only have time for a podcast. So do the free stuff first. But those are the three ministries I really like.
And for those of you who were here a couple of weeks ago, and just to kind of jump back to something related to that, especially, particularly if you're in what you consider a healthy church, exhaust the resources in your church. Why are you jumping somewhere else when you're not even listening to your own pastor and you're following your own Bible studies in your church? And if you think because you're above them or they're wrong, why are you at that church, right? It doesn't make sense. So if you're in a church that's a healthy church, are you begging the pastor to equip you? Are you trying to be equipped in every way possible? That's where it's supposed to begin. And all of these other things are incredibly helpful because obviously there's much more than what we can just get from within our churches. But just to put a plug in for the local church, please start there.